What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the third and final installment of What If Deku Ate the Jiki Jiki no Mi. It's been a long time coming, and I think I kind of nailed the ending of this series right on the head. It actually ended kind of cool. And also, there's one thing that I want to tell you guys. I'm going to be buying Luffy's sword, like the actual real-life replica version, and I'm gonna start like cutting things. If you guys want me to make a video on that alone, like I probably could, but yeah. Anyways, though, let's get into the video.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Izuku, upon seeing the message that he had just received from Jiro, not Inko, proceeds to have the life flush from his eyes. He reads the message again and sits there in utter defeat. The man's life just got flipped on its head, and Izuku pretty much just doesn't know what to do. He looks at the text and he's like, there is no way. But then he responds, are you serious? And Jiro sends back a laughing emoji with no. Izuku, after seeing that, would be like, oh, thank God. And from here, he proceeds to essentially just like feel this weight lifted off his shoulder. This man, Izuku, feels as if he just won the lottery. He then goes back to text. Why would you ever do that to me? I will kill you the next time I see you. And Jiro just sends back the skull emoji. Izuku, seeing this, is like, that damn woman. And from here, he would go on to essentially just go back to UA, where they would all end up meeting each other once more. And Izuku nudges Jiro on the shoulder pretty damn hard the next time he sees her. He tells her never to play like that, and Jiro just looks at him and she's like, it's just a joke, get over it. Izuku looks at her and says, this is not something to joke about. From here, he goes on to listen to All Might as he goes on to explain that they're going to be having an obstacle race where they're going to be having to rescue somebody. And by somebody, he means himself. Izuku, after hearing this, would think to himself that sounds interesting. It sounds fun almost. And from here, All Might then begins to explain the area that they're going to be doing so in. And it's an area covered with iron, metal, and things of the nature that Izuku could definitely mess with. That said, as soon as the event would be called, instead of Izuku copying Bakugo's moves, what he essentially ends up doing is using his magnet fruit to essentially lift up one of the pieces of rubble underneath himself. So he's just on top of it, and he then proceeds to essentially like fly with it like some sort of hoverboard, right? Like he starts flying with the thing, and the dude just starts gliding towards the direction where All Might's at, even faster than, you know, dollar store Spider-Man can do it. By that I mean Sarah. But Izuku ends up making his way towards All Might, and All Might just looks at him with a smile on his face, saying, I'm glad you made it, young Midoriya. Izuku then looks to All Might and says, yeah, it was a little bit of a hassle, but I made it here. He then goes on to grab All Might and then be the winner of this. This would lead everybody to think that Izuku's awesome, and Bakugo would just be getting more and more jealous as the days go by. Eventually though, however, they would end up being told about the final exams and what this exactly entails. They would be told about the fact that everybody's going to have to be studying for their final exam, and also they're going to be having to get prepared in terms of their quirks for fighting robots, as they are to believe. Izuku, thinking that they're going to fight robots, would be extremely overconfident, and also he has one for all. So there's no real reason for Izuku to ever stress about any physical task that happens in the world of My Hero. There's just no reason for Izuku to ever think that something is not going to go his way, basically. But that out of the way, what essentially ends up happening is Izuku goes on to study, right? Now he studies, he does his thing, and you know, he doesn't exactly study that much, but he studies a bit, if you get what I'm saying. And from here, he ends up kind of just making his way to the study hall where all of his other classmates are there, right? He sees Jiro hanging out with Kaminari and a bunch of other people, and Izuku seeing this is like, oh, that's cool. From here, he goes on to sit next to Momo, and he's like, hey, so you think you can help tutor me? She looks at him, you know, she has a smile, she has like a little blushy face or whatever. Izuku then goes on to be like, you know, I just need some help, I'm pretty backed up. He goes on to act dumb for a little bit, and Jiro, watching this all go down, would be like, yo, That's my whole man. What is he doing? But he looks at her and he smirks, and she understands what Deku's doing. He's getting back at her because of what she's currently doing. So Izuku would, go back to being with Momo, and Jiro gets very, very jealous. She then goes on to double down and be with Kaminari more and more, and this would lead the entire area and classroom to be like, what's going on between those two? Aren't they supposed to be like dating or something? And from here, Jiro proceeds to essentially kiss Kaminari. Once Kaminari does this, he's shocked and he's like, aren't you dating Izuku? But Izuku doesn't care. He walks out of the room with Momo, and he ends up going to the Yaoyorozu residence, where essentially what ends up happening is Izuku gets down, right? My man gets down, and that's all I have to say. Anyways, though, basically following these interactions, they would finally end up getting to the finals day, where once they arrive to class, Izuku aces it, and he actually ends up getting the highest score in the class, beating the likes of Momo herself. She would be extremely impressed with Izuku, and he would thank her for all of her help. Jiro then goes up to Izuku and is like, what are you doing? Like, why are you hanging out with her that much? Like, what did you do? Izuku then looks at Jiro and says that, like what they have going on was cool and all, but she decided to do what she did first, so he was just returning the favor. Jiro looks to Izuku and says, fine, whatever. And from here, Izuku begins to hang out with Momo. More and more and more. And eventually, once they do end up doing the final exams where Izuku has to face All Might himself with the help of Bakugo, since they know that Bakugo doesn't like Izuku, once Bakugo rushes in at All Might and begins to try to essentially beat him down, All Might pretty much proceeds to clobber down Bakugo, and after that ends up pretty much happening, Izuku is simply left there to be like, alright then, I guess I'll help. From here, he ends up pretty much ripping out the metal from tons and tons of buildings, and he ends up creating this gigantic arm. It's massive. Let me tell you, this arm is like the size of a building itself, right? And Izuku just smiles, and then using One for All would smash this fish straight into All Might, smacking him out of the finish line, leading to Izuku simply grabbing Bakugo by his leg and dragging him all the way to the finish line slowly and painfully. As he ends up passing, and the teachers would end up asking Izuku why he had to take it so far. Izuku says it's not his fault, Bakugo was lazy and fell asleep during the match, and they would be like, yeah, right, fell asleep. But from here, they end up basically being told about the forest training camp, and what ends up going down from here is the entire class group ends up making their way towards the UA shopping, no, not the UA shopping mall, but the shopping mall district that they have nearby. What Izuku ends up doing is, instead of going there, he ends up actually taking one of Momo's private jets along with her to go to an even bougier place and go buy supplies for the forest. Eventually, we time skip to the point where they're all in the bus and everybody's having a great time. They're all doing their thing, they're all vibing, they're all just chilling, you know what I mean? And eventually, they end up getting to the point where, Jiro's looking at Izuku and she's sad, and Izuku's just having a blast with Momo. He pretty much forgot about Jiro, because what she did was pretty much unforgivable. And Izuku personally, he wasn't finna let that slide. Anyways, though, what basically ends up happening following this little event is Izuku and everybody else makes their way towards the forest thing, where Mandalay ends up pretty much shooting them off the cliff, leading them to have to walk all the way to the actual training camp for the next 4 hours, which would be helped a lot by the fact that Izuku, wouldn't be helped at all by the fact that there's almost no metal nearby, or scrap metal that he usually would use. He ends up having to use the iron minerals from the ground, which is actually kind of plentiful, that he ends up using in tandem with One for All to actually start helping with the defeat of these dirt monsters, right? And what ends up happening following this is basically they make their way there, and Izuku ends up meeting Koda, right? Now Koda, when he sees Izuku and Izuku sees him, he's not exactly gonna walk up to him and get hit in the family jewels. No, that doesn't happen to him. Instead, it happens to Kaminari. And Izuku, watching this, would smile and look to Koda as he gives him a thumbs up and tells him he did good. He then proceeds to, see as Koda kind of gives him the finger. And Izuku would have a half smile on his face as Bakugo smirks and says, "That's my boy." As from here, we basically have it to the point where all of them end up getting situated in the forest area, and eventually the day comes where the forest attack would happen. I'm not going to be covering their training because it's just that, training. And there's no real point in covering an event like that. Or from my point of view, there's no point. Right? So basically, I'm just going to be jumping into what I believe would end up actually happening, which is essentially going to be this. Izuku's chilling with Momo. Momo sees that Koda went off somewhere without eating. She looks to Izuku and says, "Hey, you should go give him some food." And Izuku looks at her and says, "Do I have to?" Momo looks at him and says, "Come on, it'd be a nice thing to do." And Izuku grabs the bowl and then walks over towards Koda grudgingly. He ends up taking his sweet time making his way there, and eventually once he arrives, he sees Muscular was about to crush Koda. So essentially what Izuku does is jump in the way and catch Koda and pretty much like curdle around him so that they don't have that hard of a landing, or at least Koda doesn't. Eventually from here, pieces of like iron and stuff would end up making their way towards Izuku and catching them mid-air. Oh my god. I'm tired. Boys, I'm tired. But I'm gonna finish this video. It ends up catching them midair, and basically what ends up happening following this is Izuku looks to Koda and tells him, "Get out of here, kid. You're not welcome here. Go to Aizawa. He'll know what to do." Koda looks at him with terrified expression on his face, and Muscular would jump down from the mountain, leading to Izuku to crack his knuckles and then say, "That wasn't exactly the most pleasant thing I've ever experienced, but you know what? This won't be either." He covers his arms in armament hockey and clashes his fists together as he then proceeds to essentially rush in at the direction of, what's it called? He rushes in at the direction of Muscular and essentially ends up punching the man square in the jaw, sending Muscular flying, crashing into the mountainside. When Muscular lands, he grabs at his jaw and he's like, "That was some blow, kid." He then proceeds to look back towards Izuku, but he's gone. He's right behind him. And Izuku would look up to him as he grabs him by the shoulder and slams him into the earth. Then proceeding to essentially beat the man in the face like over and over and over and over as Muscular gets knocked out, and Izuku then rushes his way towards the direction of Aizawa, where he ends up arriving and seeing that Koda's just fine. Then he ends up wondering to himself, "Momo, where's Momo?" He ends up rushing into the forest, and instead of going on to help Ojiro or, no, not Ojiro, but Duple Arms and Tokiyami, what basically ends up happening is, how do I put this? Like, does Duple Arms die? Comment it down below in the comments. Do you guys think Duple Arms would die, or do you think he would survive via some miracle? I personally am going to be going with the theory that Todoroki and Bakugo were eventually able to defeat the guy with the teeth, and after almost getting brutally injured, Bakugo and Todoroki were able to arrive and shoot flames at Tokiyami's direction, causing the bird freak to calm down. Following this, we cut to Izuku in the forest, rushing towards Momo, thinking to himself if she's okay. He spots the Nomu, and from here, Izuku wastes no time to jump in front of the way of Momo and the weird boy that was with her, and he then asks, "Momo, are you safe?" Momo looks at him and says, "Yeah, Izuku, thanks." And from here, Izuku proceeds to say, "You got a lot of nerve messing with my lady." As from here, he proceeds to bring up a gigantic fist that surrounds the Nomu, as he would then crush his hand, and all of the iron in the earth would essentially form like magnetized sand kind of thing that would just crush the Nomu in its fist and destroy it completely. The Nomu's not regenerating from that. I'm sorry to tell you guys, but it's not happening. If it was to happen, everybody else would be doomed. But basically, the Nomu gets destroyed, and following these events, Izuku rushes towards Momo to ask if she's fine. They then make their way towards the area where Bakugo and Todoroki are at, and once they end up arriving, they realize Bakugo and Tokiyami are gone. This ends up leading to the entire forest training arc thing basically ending like it would in canon, and everybody talking about how, their teammates got kidnapped, how they're not going to be let in this slide. Kirishima says that as a man, he just can't let Bakugo be taken away. And Izuku actually ends up agreeing. He's like, "You know what? I've been aching to fight more of these villains myself. How about I go along with you guys? He ends up joining the force, and with Momo alongside of him, with him being able to actually convince her of creating the tracking device for them, he's able to essentially make his way towards the Kamino incident, where essentially Izuku arrives with everybody else, and once they end up kind of spying on the fight between All For One and All Might, and all the other villains are there nearby, and Bakugo's there and everything, Izuku's like, nah, F that, I'm not playing these games. Y'all save Bakugo, I'm helping All Might. He instantly activates One For All and rushes in towards the direction of One For All, yeah, and rushes in towards the direction of All For One and lands the biggest haymaker, or so he thinks. A force field of air would surround All For One as he pushes Izuku back, and he then shoots black tendrils at Izuku, which end up piercing his stomach area. Izuku coughs out blood and lays down on the floor. As All Might watches this go down, he's like, "No, my student!" He then looks at All For One as he says, I'll kill you. And from here, All For One laughs and says, "I'd love to watch you try, Toshinori," as All Might rushes in towards All For One's direction with the United States of Smash, and coming in, they both begin to clash with their fists. Izuku stands up slowly with his One For All charged, and with one hand out, he basically has two buildings literally collapse and smash All For One like a sandwich, literally crushing this man to smithereens. And Izuku then would look to All For One as he would say, "Good riddance." From here, he ends up essentially being locked up for a couple of months. That's just what realistically would happen. Normally, I'd be like, nobody was able to watch, but this actually happened in the general area of Kamino Ward, where there was a chopper that caught all the events that happened. So Izuku ends up kind of being like locked up, not exactly for jail, but for trial, and his hero abilities are pretty much suspended for the time being. What ends up essentially happening is during the time that Izuku suspended, the class would end up going to the provisional license thing, they all would end up passing, and eventually would end up going on with their internships, which still ends up happening just like it kind of would have in canon, except this time around, Eri doesn't exactly get saved the first time around, and the overall attack that they would have done would have still happened, except the only difference this time would be that since Izuku's not exactly around, he wasn't there to save Eri once all was said and done, and Mirio still ends up getting his quirk erased, then promptly killed, because Izuku basically ended up changing the future with his One For All abilities. But seeing as he's not here anymore, that doesn't happen. So basically, once Izuku ends up being released by the Hero Commission, they end up essentially telling him that they noticed a couple of things about him. Number one, he's not like most other heroes. He doesn't believe in change via allowing people to have the opportunity to try and better themselves. Izuku believes in change via getting rid of the problem. If there's no problem, then there is no issue. And that's exactly how Izuku views the world, and how many of us should view it. Why should we give other people the chance to keep doing the things that are bad? We should fucking kill, I did not mean to cuss, okay? Susan, please don't give my video a yellow mark, please. Please and thank you. Anyways though, so we should not give people the ability to essentially continue doing those things, and we should just get rid of them. We should off them. At least that's how I think most anime protagonists should deal with them. So basically, the Pro Hero Commission ends up deciding that Izuku is going to be kind of a hero similar to Hawks, where they're going to essentially fund everything that he does, and Izuku's going to be having the ability to actually off these characters and put them on t-shirts, or at least the villains. After a couple of months of training with the Hero Commission and not actually returning to UA High School, Izuku gets his ordeals in order, right? He ends up getting closer with Momo, Jiro and him end up making things up, and Jiro becomes his side piece somewhat. Momo is completely unaware. I just think that's what Yusa's kid would do personally. Basically, he ends up essentially making his way towards, he ends up making his way towards Overhaul and essentially dismantling the dude. He was not surviving after Izuku found out what he did to that little girl. Like, destroying her and rebuilding her over and over. Bro, you don't do that to a little kid. So Izuku basically ends up pretty much torturing Overhaul before he finally got rid of him, and then taking Eri to the Pro Hero Commission to actually be trained. They would end up actually asking of the help of Aizawa to help with the training of Eri, and the training process would actually be a very good one. She ends up becoming a hero under the Pro Hero Commission, and all's well that ends well. That is essentially where I'm going to be ending. What if Deku ate the Jiki Jiki no Mi? I wonder what you guys thought about this video down below in the comments. If you're here for the movie version, make sure to let me know by commenting hashtag magnet, hashtag magnet is here or something like that, right? But if you're here from the normal part series, then make sure to comment hashtag ending, just hashtag ending. That said though, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether. Make sure to check out the links down below in the description. And I'm out. Peace.